Dr. Greg Mills is with the Brenthurst Foundation. He's the head there. Dr. Mills, listening to Govan, the issue around permits and weapons and South Africa not wanting to say much about it. We're fresh out of Lady R, and I shouldn't say out of, we're still very much dealing with an inquiry that is taking place. How much of that has contributed to the level of suspicion that perhaps South African officials have been dealt with by Poland here?
Oh, good evening. Thank you. I mean, I think there's two explanations for the chaos that seemingly unfurled in Warsaw and between Warsaw and Rzeszów in the south east of Poland. I mean, the first of these is, as your correspondent has said, is sort of amateur hour. Combination of amateur hour and arrogance, thinking that we could just sort of, get these things through. From what I hear from the various embassies, they had long engagement with various police and other operatives from the Polish side, but from the Ukrainian side, literally just a day before. So it seems to be that there was a high degree of arrogance that we could just sort of bluster our way through this absent the necessary paperwork. The other is perhaps a more conspiratorial theory, which fits in with your Lady R concept, which is perhaps the presidency wanted the journalists not to get to Ukraine, to see Ukraine for themselves, to have the interviews that could present Ukraine in a particular light. And this was a way of scuppering that, even if it meant upsetting a large number of journalists on the plane. Mm-hmm. And then the other sort of conspiracy theory out there at the moment is that when we knew we couldn't take the weapons in on the train that goes from Rzeszów into Kiev, and in spite of that, we had all these weapons, and clearly they were never going to let these weapons either into an EU country or into Ukraine. But we believed somehow that we could get them through, given the security imperative. But precisely because of that security imperative, we weren't going to let them in. There's also a sort of an additional conspiracy theory that the weapons were intended for Russian use, and perhaps that's also more like the Lady R. But I do think it circles back to the real reason for this trip in the first instance, and the timing thereof. It was very hastily organized, it was hastily announced, it seized on a pre-existing initiative on the part of the Brazzaville Foundation, which had more or less gone to sleep since the early part of the year, and then suddenly the president seized on that. And this has sort of given rise to three theories, that this was either China pushing this through the BRICS because it wanted to insert itself at the heart of European security, and that South Africa was intending, however, thirdly, on trying to freeze the conflict, in addition to trying to sort of create squid ink sort of obfuscation around its role in the Lady R affair. And then another, perhaps, theory in all of this, when we're always looking at the downside, I suppose, is that suddenly the South African government thought it really should do something about the conflict in Ukraine after nearly, a year and a half of remaining silent on the issue. I think people are more focused on the first theories, the obfuscation around Lady R, working for China, or trying to freeze the conflict before the Ukrainian counteroffensive.
If we look at what's been happening over the last couple of weeks, and I'm speaking here really to your questioning of the timing, we've had a delegation of 7 ministers go to several Western countries to try and communicate South Africa's position in person around the conflict. We have the economic minister, Ibrahim Patel, going to the U.S. again to try and prevent a fallout over AGOA. One certainly gets the sense that there is a lot of scurrying in government to try and contain the fallout, the global fallout from South Africa's position that has been communicated as that of being non-aligned. But certainly, I think there is a lot of evidence, if we go deeper into not just the government, but also the position of the ANC, that there's a lot of questioning around the credibility of that non-alignment. When we see it in that context, does it not make sense that this is part of that scurrying? Because it feels like government is trying to control fires that are going up everywhere and sort of going in whichever direction they think might yield results.
I mean, yours is probably the most plausible explanation, that we're scurrying around trying to make good the fiasco of South Africa's policy position, which runs counter to issues of human rights and territorial integrity and indeed the founding principles of the UN Charter, which we supposedly sign up and adhere to. And that because of the sudden cost expressed by the United States of our position, which was highlighted by the U.S. ambassador's statement, Ruben Brigitte, in South Africa, that suddenly the president felt it necessary to bring about a peace mission to try and to illustrate South Africa's desire to end this conflict and not to support the Russian position. But if he really wanted to come clean, as it were, to point out South Africa's non-alignment, all he had to do was to ask for the manifest of the goods that were in the Lady R, call in the head of the Simonstown dockyard and say what was on there. And effectively what he did was he obfuscated that. He sort of denied that by establishing a commission of inquiry. He kicked it into touch, to look for a sporting metaphor. And then he then launched this peace initiative simultaneously to try and prove our good offices. If South Africa was really non-aligned, we would have said what was on that vessel. If South Africa was really non-aligned, we would be having not just sort of balanced relations between Ukraine and Russia, but we would have been sending ministers to Ukraine, not just to Russia. We would have been having military exercises with Ukraine, not just with Russia and China. Non-alignment means non-alignment. Right. Not between Russia and the United States, but between Russia, in this instance, and Ukraine.
Dr. Greg Mills, we'll have to leave it there for tonight. Thank you so much for your time on News at Prime. He's the head of the Brenthurst Foundation.